to hear your word and to apply it to our lives, to allow it to transform our hearts. Gracious Lord, speak unto us in spite of me. Use your words through my lips and touch each of our hearts. Change each of our lives in your image. For these things we pray. Amen. Well, we are finally coming to the end of our series on Job, just in time before the beginning of Lent. Most of you probably at this point have gotten through all of the recaps of Job, and so you are fairly aware of what was going on. Job was a man who was very blessed, had everything. He lost it all. He had multiple ways of trying to deal with that. And last week we heard God come and speak to Job. And from what we heard, God was not angry at Job for being upset with him. But instead, God chose to remind Job of who God was. To remind Job that God is the one who provides for all his creations, that he's not someone who arbitrarily destroys or punishes, that he loves and provides for those things that he spent so much time and effort making. And so we get to this week. The end of Job's story. The promised land that I told you about 6 weeks ago. The moment where everything gets restored and all gets made right. And if you'll note that our story today, we heard Job's response to God. God, I spoke about that which I did not know. Things that were too great for me to possibly know and understand. Therefore, Lord, I take back what I said. May you instruct me now. And the Lord not only accepts what Job says, but then the Lord goes to Job's friends and speaks to Job's friends. These same friends that we heard about 3 weeks ago. And the Lord speaks to them and tells them, I find fault with you three. I find fault for you have spoken falsely about me, and you have tried to bring Job down when Job has done nothing but right. Therefore, you three are to take and make a sacrifice to ask for forgiveness. And you are to bring the sacrifice to Job, and he will ask it for you, and I will accept it, as I accept him. Note what God does here. He sets up for us a pattern of forgiveness that we won't see anywhere else in the Old Testament, and we won't see again until Christ. That Job is forgiven for speaking out against God, for being unaware of what he did not know. But that forgiveness involves him also forgiving those who hurt him. That in offering the sacrifice for them, Job must forgive the three friends who had let him down and tried to change who he was and what he thought about God. And the story continues. And we find that Job is given back all of his assets. In fact, he's given more than what he had before. He is blessed upon blessed for being faithful through this entire ordeal. And he has 7 new sons and 3 new daughters. And not that they can replace the ones that he lost, but these are as faithful or even more faithful than those before. And his daughters are considered the most beautiful in the land. And Job does something else that is completely surprising in this part of the story. He actually leaves his daughters an inheritance, something completely unheard of in the Middle Eastern world then, and in some ways even today. And Job is blessed. His family, his brothers, his sisters, his wife all come back to him. Everything begins to be made right. Now, as the people of God, again I told you that this was a parable of sorts, that it most likely wasn't a real or historical account of a person. Because I think we can all admit that if we lost children, having new children in the same numbers does not replace the ones that we lost. And I think that we can also admit that in some ways the restoration here at the end of the story is not something that we can often realistically expect while we're here on earth. These kind of major reversals don't always happen this way, especially around the loss of loved ones. But if we look as the children of God at God's plan and God's kingdom and God's eternity, we will find that the story of Job and restoration is, in fact, possible in our lives. But some of it will have to wait until we enter into his kingdom. Because while God can bring other people into our lives to fill in the hole that is created by the loss of loved ones, it is not until we are reunited with them again in his kingdom that relationship will truly and fully be restored. But this whole story is meant as a reminder for us about how we are meant to live and be in the world. Again, as we've been saying all along, the importance of Job and what he does and his actions is that throughout all of the struggle, throughout all of the pain, all of the suffering, he remains in conversation and relationship with God. And in doing so, he allows God to enter in and begin the process of healing and restoration in his life. It is through that relationship that Job discovers and sees God face to face. And he moves from being a God that Job has only heard about to being a God that Job can see in his own life. And it is in that building of the relationship that Job does find his restoration, just as we can find our restoration. We may lose jobs, and those are things that we can expect God to restore unto us and to bless us with in this world. And we may have other tragic accidents and all of those kind of things, and we may have people say all manner of evils against us or try to lead us astray, and God can work and restore those things in our lives. And as we learn from Job, I hope that we will remember that when we make God a priority in our lives and when we maintain that relationship, we allow God to do his work to fix the rest of our lives. That when we can focus solely on God, then we open up the other parts of our lives for God to do his work there and to heal our brokenness and to restore our fortunes and bless us greatly. It is when we try to cling and control our own lives and fix all of our own problems that we find enter in and come and be the solver and the parent that he is meant to be. And so as the children of God, I hope that from this story of Job we can learn to trust in God. And that we can look forward to his restoration, both here in this world for some things, but ultimately in his eternal kingdom, where there is no sorrow, no pain, no suffering, no loss, but instead joy. Because in that eternity, God can make up for all of the things, all of the loss, all of the broken relationships that we have gone through in our time here on earth. May we be the people of God, people who grow in that relationship and place all our trust in him. Amen.